take a look at Wings of War. This is the famous Aces box. Apparently there are multiple different sets of it. It's sort of like a collectible in the sense that you need more copies of the game to play more different combinations of planes. I'm going to just do this with 2 planes. This is what my wife and I did. First off, a Soppy Camel and a Fokker triplane, and of course it's the Red Baron Zone. Go over the rules a little bit, although I suspect that there are better people out there who have covered the rules to this. I largely remember the game. I'm going to briefly go over it and not go into too much detail. So the way you play the game is basically each person has a deck of these maneuver cards. And you select 3 of them in order, boink, 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 say. You don't do it at random, you do it by choice. And then you play them out simultaneously, and then this plane would move so that the arrow covers this up, you pull this out, and you've gotten, you know, a maneuver underway that way. Each of the different planes has its own maneuver deck, which is based on this first letter here, of which will also be on the airplane itself. There are a number of these different boards. I'm not sure if it's 1 per plane. Yeah, it looks like it's 1 per plane. You actually have a pile of different planes of each type. So there'll be multiple Sopwith Camel cards in the game. But the reality is you probably can only play with 1 of each plane because each person needs a full deck of maneuver cards, and the game comes with 4 different types of maneuver cards which align to the particular planes. Likewise, the game comes with these firing cards, which we'll explain in a little bit. If you line up in a situation so that your firing arc, and some planes not in this set, will have an observer gun as well, which will have an arc. If you line up in a situation where you have a firing position, what you do is you put this little measuring stick here, and you can shoot out that arc along that line. It's a better fire if you can do it at the halfway point or less. If you can't reach the full point and touch some part of the enemy plane, you're not going to get a shot off. And the way you run a shot is you deal the guy a card, or 2 if you're at close range. And he looks at them and sees what they do, and this will be like just 1 point of damage. Planes have a certain amount of damage. This one, for example, will have 15 points of damage. You keep the damage here. This space here is for if you've got continuous fire on an enemy, your damage does more. That's an advanced rule. We'll be playing with it, but also some of the damage have special effects. In the basic game, the only special effect is gun jams. If you get one of these suckers, the guy's gun has jammed who just shot you. And you reveal this card, show it to him, and say, uh-oh, and that guy is going to get 3 of these gun jam markers on his plane, and each movement from then on, he removes 1 of them until his gun's clear again, and then he can get shots off. Okay, so at the beginning of each turn, each player slaps down 3 of these cards that they choose to set up their movement, and then each player reveals a card, does their movement simultaneously, does any fire and damage that might occur from that, and keeps going. And eventually, you're done. You know, somebody gets shot down, or somebody falls off the table. One of the rules of the game is you have a constrained playing space that should be fairly large, but it is constrained. It has to be finite, and if you fly out of that area, you end up taking a loss by withdrawal. Now, there are a few special rules for movement, which are, if you do a card, a movement card, let's find one. Okay, movement cards have these little directional spaces on them. If it has a diamond on it, you can't do another diamond directly after it. And obviously you can't do one directly before it either because you'd have done a diamond. The other is, that's of interest, is the Immelmann, which I have to find. There's an Immelmann. It faces down. The only way you can do this is if you did something that faced straight beforehand, and then you must do something straight afterwards. And that even pertains if you cut across the turn boundary. The turn boundary is something I actually have something of a disagreement with. If planes fly over one another, then I think if their cards are overlapping, yeah, if the cards themselves are overlapping in any way, neither one can shoot at each other because they're considered to be at different levels in order to avoid a collision there. In-air collisions were pretty damn rare. There's a series of scenarios. I've only ever played the Duel Over the Trenches, but with different planes. I'm not really sure how much fun the different scenario sets are. Well, so for example, this one only handles 2 scenarios with this set. If I had the second set, I could have these additional scenarios added to it. But you can really kind of mix and match. Probably no more than 2 planes per side is really reasonable with a single set. But if you have more than that and enough players, because you kind of want to play this with 1 player per plane. It's very much like Blue Max that way. It's a very quick-paced game and everything, but you really do only want to be controlling 1 plane, I think. Then you end up, you know, needing multiple sets to be able to fly, you know, a big dogfight with like 6 planes in the air on a side or something like that. Okay, to that we add some optional rules. First of all, special damage. Special damage cards are going to include, let's see if we can find them. I believe this one says your plane's been destroyed. I think that was actually off the original set. Yeah. If you draw that little burst that I just showed you, and have now hidden in the rules somewhere, you have to show this as well. Your plane's been destroyed, the other guy won. That's in the base game as well. There are these guys who say you can't turn in a certain direction. How long does that last? I think it's 3 turns. No, the entire next turn you won't be able to pick turns going in that direction. It doesn't affect your current turn's movement that you've already plotted, but in your next turn it'll be that penalty. This little dead guy just says that the observer's been killed. So you don't get any automatic shot down of the pilots, but if you get this, you could knock out the observer. The shot down pilot is basically this thing, I guess. If you get a couple of, I'm having trouble finding these special things here. These couple of cogs, and you can see already there's sort of this weird situation because when you do damage, those suckers are held by the player who takes the damage. And I believe you do not reshuffle this deck in general. Which essentially means that if there's only one of these little cogs thing in there, only one person's going to suffer an engine hit throughout the game. This is kind of problematic again to my feel of the game. In terms of how realistic it is, it seems like the same results should be able to come up on both players or on multiple players fairly easily. Okay, so this engine damage thing, that says the plane has to play a stall each turn, which is going to be the little diamond arrow, which is actually supposed to be a steep climb. But if you take a second engine hit in the game somehow, and I don't know how that would happen because there's only one in the deck, you would your plane is wrecked. It's destroyed. Impossible to do if you're holding these as your damage markers, which is what the game seems to indicate. Some stuff is clear, however, to your opponent. So, for example, if you take one of these, you keep the damage card because it's got your hits on it, but you also are showing this, which means you're going to trail the smoke trailer. And you get 3 smoke counters. You discard 1 at the end of each turn, and you can't do tailing, which we haven't gotten to yet, for the rest of that turn and during the next 2 turns until you've removed the smoke counters. A little fire indicates your plane's caught fire. That'll be put in your damage space of the game board each turn. Before revealing the first maneuver of the turn, you discard a flame counter and take a damage card. Only the points or deadly explosion count, but you also count as having smoke in the sense that you won't be able to tail. Okay, I had talked about some things about, hey, you could get a +1 to the damage. You can if you fired at someone and then you fire at them again on your next maneuver. That firing opportunity, any damage results go in this +1 box. Those are all going to be a +1, unless I think they're zeros. I think zeros do not. Yeah, zeros are still zeros. If you do something illegal with your plane either crashes or goes straight, depending on how you want to handle the rules. The optional rules say it crashes. The basic rules say you're forced to do a straight maneuver. Tailing. Okay. If I've got your gun arc, if I've got my gun arc able to reach basically the back end of your plane, how is this done? Ruler connecting the center of an airplane to the center of the tailed airplane. If the ruler is long enough to pass through the front side of the airplane card and through the rear side of the other one, and if the ruler does not cross any other plane card in between, tailing is possible. So I don't have to be quite as close as I do to shoot. So for example, I would have a firing opportunity here. For tailing, all I have to do is be able to touch the 2 cards, front to back. And extend slightly over it. What the tailing is going to do is that, let me try to remember this. If one person's tailing the other, before revealing the first maneuver, the tailed player has to show his first card to the tailing player. Then the latter can rearrange his 3 cards that he's picked for his actions, his movement actions. So if you have a nice selection of cards, you'll be able to probably get a shot off based on what you can see of your opponent's choice. That will continue beyond the beginning of the turn if you maintain the tailing position. Tailing is first judged at the beginning of the turn. If you don't have it then, you're not going to get it midway through the turn. Another slight gripe in terms of the accuracy of this whole thing. I feel like the game, I like the 3 pre-program idea. I feel like that should be floating somehow, that there should be no turn limits, no turn breaks on here. But if you maintain your tailing position, you will be allowed to rearrange then your 2 remaining cards after seeing the opponent's second card. And third card, it isn't going to matter. And that's about it. We'll do a quick playthrough of this, and then I'll come back with a review.